Thank you, everyone, for coming back for this afternoon session. We are going to be talking about scaling up smart building design. I'm Brad White from SES Consulting. I am an engineer working in the Vancouver area, do a lot of control system design. But I'm very excited for this session because I think I'm going to learn a lot from these guys. But to get started, I actually wanted to tell a little bit of a story for a project that I've been involved in recently. And it was... we were asked by one of our clients to get involved in a job that we hadn't been involved in previously, but they were in the process of building an expansion to a major shopping center. So they were adding, a few 100,000 square feet to an existing shopping center. Big project. This is one of our clients who probably is the most sophisticated in terms of their controls already. They have a fantastic control standard. They're a national building owner in Canada. They've got properties all across the country, all Class A, fantastic control spec. But we got called into this job shortly after they realized that as part of this expansion project, the mechanical consultant hadn't actually done a control spec. So the controls the control spec was actually issued as a site instruction partway through the job. It got awarded to a different contractor than who was servicing the whole rest of the existing complex. Whole new system, whole new contractor. So we got called in basically as a third party to say, hey, can you guys take a look at these control shop drawings and let us know, are we actually getting what we want? And they weren't. There was a whole bunch of things missing, but I mean, I'm going through, and like I said, they've got this great control standard, and I'm going through it, and I'm like, do you know your control standard says this? And they're like, oh yeah, we don't actually want that. Okay, why is it in your standard? They're like, well, we actually only care about this other thing, and it was mainly making sure that everything was IP based, and so fantastic. We sorted all that out. But, here we are, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars this project was, but, the fact that the controls could be completely overlooked. We have a client who is not following their own control standard and has no interest in following their own control standard, is faced with a legacy situation where they're going to be stuck with one operator dealing with two completely different control systems that are not going to talk to each other because nobody thought about integration. I don't want to use the term dumpster fire loosely, but that's kind of what it is. And this is a big, sophisticated owner. And I mean, I've seen, a lot of issues that are, not maybe that quite of a complex situation, but we see it all the time where owners are failing to get what the industry has promised that they can get out of the control system. And so that's really what I want to talk about here today. And I want these guys to talk about, and I want you all to ask lots of questions, is how can we take all of the promise, I mean, we've been here talking about AI and decarbonization, all kinds of, I would say, pretty high-minded things, new trends in the industry, new technologies, but at the end of the day, I think there's still this element of we're failing to deliver on what we've been promising. And as a controls engineer who writes specs and is involved in delivering projects to clients, that's something I care a lot about. So I want to know how we get better at that, and that's what I want these guys to talk about. And get them all to introduce themselves. They're knowledgeable, fantastic panel. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm sure you're all going to too. But before we get started, I just want to get a sense of who's actually in the room today. So maybe if you're an engineer, consultant, can you just raise your hand? Okay. What about if you're a contractor, installer? Okay. I think that makes up most of the room. Product, sales, product rep? Okay. Anybody important I forgot? Owners? Any owners here? Building owners? Okay. Cool. All right. I think we've got most. If I haven't covered you, I apologize. But I think we've got most of the crowd. So that's good. That's going to help us sort of set the context for this conversation. I think you're in the right room. But yeah, let's get started. I'm going to get Greg, since you're closest. Why don't you go first?
Yeah.
Introduce yourself. Tell us what you think.
Greg Fitzpatrick. I work for Cochran Supply and Engineering in business development for IoT and integration. Been in the industry for about 30 years. No, let me rewind that. 20 years. No, I've been in the industry for about 30 years. And I started off as a consulting engineer. Ran my own firm for a handful of years, worked for a couple of large manufacturers after I got out of the consulting industry, both Train and Carrier. Also worked as a director of facilities for a large school district with over 100 buildings, at which time I met Scott Cochran, and we pretty much launched this process or this program we call the MSIP, Multiple Systems Integrated Platform. That's when Tritium's Niagara was first becoming popular. And we pushed it up to our leadership, did a couple of pilot projects, and that's when we started noticing that there was a lack of knowledge when it came to specifying integration, right, and everything that goes along with it. And one of the things that I found interesting when I came to work for Scott is the lack of knowledge in the consulting engineering community. Most large firms that I would walk into, and you guys are better than most, you guys are better than most, but the typical consulting engineer has started treating BAS and controls like fire protection. And we all know what a fire protection specification looks like, right? Performance spec, couple heads spotted, hey, contractor, figure it out, make it adhere to code. Well, one of the things that we try to do at Cochrane is start educating the consulting community so that they understand that there's a process and things have changed over the years, right? The control industry has been moving as fast as iPhones, literally. And what it's done is it's intimidated consulting firms because they don't want to have to recreate the wheel. There's a lot of cutting and pasting going on in the consulting engineering community. We all know that, right?
No. Write every spec from scratch.
Right. And one thing we started off with was teaching them what an open system actually is, right? And how many of you know what an open system is when it comes to BAS specifications? Good, not many hands. An open system is open protocol. We all agree to a certain extent it's BACnet. Open technology, which would be Niagara. And there's a lot of manufacturers that would tell you that their systems are open, but the third pillar of being an open system is open distribution, where there's a marketplace of systems integrators who can purchase, install, program, commission, and maintain that BAS system. Okay? That's the third leg, which is so important. So what we've done is try to spin the process such that they understand what needs to go into the construction documents now, right? When you look at your specification. Products here, qualified systems integrators here. And that's very, very important to separate the two. Here's your open products. Here's the qualified systems integrators in your market that should be bidding on that project, right? Well, how do you get systems integrators to bid on a project? You put together a good set of documents. And what should be in a good set of documents? A clear and concise specification that tells a story and assigns work. Not only that, a systems integration drawing. And I'm going to go into that a little later, but we start promoting this drawing called a systems integration drawing that goes from the subnetworks all the way back to, quote unquote, the front end or your web supervisor. How is Niagara being deployed? Is it being deployed in the cloud? Is it on-prem server, right? Is it being deployed somewhere else? But we want to show all of that information on one drawing. You put as much as you can on a set of drawings and the rest in the specification. You don't try to bury things in the specification. You want to put as much on the drawings as possible. So where are my routers? Where are my network management switches? Where are my edge switches if I have IP technology? How much technology is IP? How much is 485? Am I using some type of wireless BACnet solution? So all of those things can go on one drawing, and that's what we've been trying to do is promote the use of these type of documents so that we can have a set of clear and concise documents so that we can get the appropriate bidders.
You mean we shouldn't just leave it to the contractor to figure all that out?
Absolutely not. Not unless it's design build.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Mike?
Cool. Mike McMahon with the firm Newcomb & Boyd. I'm an associate principal there and the director of Intelligent Building Studio. I really don't have anything to say after that. If we were in a debate, I would just walk away right now. You won. No. We're kind of the actualizers of the dream. That's what our studio does. And so we help the clients refine what it is that they want as an experience or an outcome, and then we map the technology back to produce that outcome. And in my time in the construction world, I found it to be an incredibly challenging place to be able to do this, right? Because there's so many people involved. There's so many different agendas. Some people, even on the client stakeholder side, there's so many people that have their own agenda. They don't care about this other group. They only care about this. Well, guess what? Everybody's got to work together, and everybody has to play to the same sheet of music in order to be able to produce those outcomes. And that's what our skill set really comes down to play as we take a look at the controls. We take a look at all operational technology across the board and what could be leveraged to produce those outcomes. And then we put and write specifications like the Div 25, that's kind of where we live. We also help out, our firm is 100 years old. It started as an MEP consulting firm or consulting engineering firm, and we've grown since then. So we bring all of that together to get all of our projects singing harmoniously so that you have this North Star defined and everybody's design work has that in mind and they're all flowing in that direction.
Excellent.
All right, Dave.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Dave Mulcahy with the Building People, Director of Smart Buildings. Recently, CBRE, I would say, in the last 17 years. I'm coming at this from the systems integration approach, right? So I'm not necessarily consulting that kind of thing, but I've been involved, probably through multiple just nationwide type deployments, global type deployments, and I totally agree with what Greg and Mike said, right? We need to partner quite a bit with the end user, right? With the owner, making sure that we really build out those use cases. Those user stories are super important. Been on a lot of projects over the years where we integrated just to integrate, and we have a lot of just little different systems that really have no purpose, right, in the building other than the fact to check a box. So maybe that was driven by a specification, or maybe the owner assumed that that's something that a technology what they wanted to use, but they really don't have any idea what they want it to be tied to. So. I think for our teams that I've worked with over the years, we've really done a great job, kind of having a lot of those smart building summits, a lot of design charrettes, talking through all the use cases, really trying to define the interoperability of these systems and exactly how success looks like, right? Identifying key metrics, everything that owner wants to see out of the building. So. It's been fun, a lot of different things that our team has done. We've done, small multi-site retail all the way to the big one, right? We'll say the Amazon warehouses worldwide. So, been quite an adventure over the years. But.
Cool. Okay, I've got a couple questions, but audience, if you have questions, start thinking of them for these guys. But I want to lead with one just because I think it picks up on what actually a point that both Dave and Mike just talked about, this idea of the stakeholder engagement and the importance of that piece. And I want to talk about one stakeholder in particular. And I'm stealing this point from Brian Turner, who was part of one of the earlier sessions on AI. But he made the point that the operators, so this is mostly for retrofit projects, more so than new construction, but that the operations team is kind of totally cut out of that process. Obviously to the detriment of the final product. But can you maybe talk, hear from maybe each of you a little bit on how do you make sure that you get the operations people involved? And that's obviously been my experience as well. It's like they're crucial, but often overlooked.
I'll start by saying I worked in facilities for a while for a large school district. They were union, right? So all the operators were union. And you're going to get a different flavor when it comes to union employees and new technology. I see you smiling. We all know how that goes, right? The more advanced the technology, the more susceptible that the union members feel as though they may lose their job or they may lose their overtime, right? So they're not into automation. They'd rather put everything in hand and start cranking valves open. So I think at the end of the day, it's important for owner operators to start educating their facilities group and their operators on the technology. Teach them how to use BMSs. Teach them how that helps to make their job a little easier, not to replace them. And when it comes to facilities, there's an aspect to facilities that's totally detached from the business side of the owner. For instance, cybersecurity, right? When you talk about cybersecurity, how much do the operators know when it comes to cybersecurity? Do they know that cybersecurity is important, right? So those are the things that we try to talk about with owner-operators is, hey, let's get IT and facilities on the same page when it comes to cybersecurity. Let's make sure that companies like Tritium and Niagara, people like Cochrane are coming in and doing training to get their facilities up to speed so that they understand that you need the latest and greatest technology to operate, energy efficient buildings.
Anybody else want to?
Sure. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a room with one or two people, and I expected a lot more. We meet with facilities folks, and we talk about operations and how we can help them. And when I talk about, okay, well, who's doing the construction work? Oh, that's the construction team. We're not involved with them. And I'm like, wait a minute. So you got somebody buying and speccing out stuff that you're eventually going to have to support, and you have no input whatsoever on that? Okay, we're going to work to close that gap. So we do it on an individual basis, right? We try to bring those stakeholders to the table. First question I ask, depending on the environment I walk into, do you have an IT group? Right? Because I know they're going to have something to say. Maybe they don't, but I have to hear it. I know I've got some clients that treat themselves as like an internet service provider like Xfinity. Oh, you need a connection? Here's an IP address and a cable, right? And they walk away. And they're like, okay, do you have standards? Do they need to do anything? Do you need to do anything to help them communicate with their stuff? Nope, we don't do anything with that. Okay, well, we got to fix that. So it's this, getting an understanding that everybody plays a part and everybody has a role, and getting everybody to sit down. And the thing is it really comes down to language, I think. That's the bigger piece. In my background, I was a network architect for a hospital, well, not a hospital, I shouldn't say a hospital, a health system with entities in 28 states. And all I did for 2 years was fly around the country, and I figured out what they needed and figure out how to make it happen. And I would talk to CIOs, I would talk to the CEOs, I'd talk to head clinicians, and then I talked to engineers. And occasionally I'd be like, we're going to talk geek for a minute, so you guys don't have to listen. And that was the key, is bridging that communication gap, right? Because facilities understands what they need and how they operate. The construction team may not understand that fully in what they have. And, the reduction in staff, the reduction in money, the ongoing operations, it always costs money. So there's ways to kind of bring both of the groups together. And that's really, I think, what's needed more is bridging those communication gaps and teaching people how to talk to each other in the disparate groups.
Engineers are very good at communication, usually. But I think, what your point kind of underscores that like those soft skills are hugely important to the technical success of a project, right?
Yep.
And I don't know, Dave?
Just real quick on that too. I totally agree. I mean, I don't know how many projects I've been on where, the maintenance, the FM team at the end of the day, you go to a VAV box, just perfect example here, the cover is up against the drywall. There's no way to change a filter on a fan power box because the design team never thought through that in the construction on the operation of and maintenance of that building. So,
or commissioning.
And the commissioning.
Or there was no
right,
commissioning.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, as we kind of go through like the different like strategies, and I think cyber is a huge one. I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to that one, Greg, but it's definitely very important to make sure that we interacting with those teams, really understanding what their needs are, and seeing how we can change that up front when we design a building. Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Question there.
I just want to add to that.
Yeah.
Only because, as an engineer, we rarely get involved in those kind of scenarios. Mm-hmm. That's basically an architectural matter where the architect does his
magic.
Whatever it is that he's done. And then they just hand that down to us, and then we solve the problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, those are the types of conversations that we have to change, right? Facilities engineers should have the seat at the table during this process, and I know it's an extra meeting on a calendar, but it's huge at the end of the day to be a part of that.
But also to get architects to be
Yes.
thinking about.
Exactly.
It's literally an industry paradigm shift. And it has to be, because you're not just building a building, you're building a smart building. So what does that really mean? It means you're leveraging technology to make people smarter about their building. Eventually, the building will become responsive and fix itself, and then it'll be an intelligent building, and it'll decide where the problem and lock the doors. So, yeah.
Very intellectual.
But but I saw that too when I first joined up with Nickman Boyd 5 years ago, is the disconnect between, okay, I've got a question here, how do I get to the owner? Well, the architect, right, the architect needs to change that pathway and accommodate a new process over the old process, right? I just do the same thing I do every year. I build buildings for 20 years, I build them the same way. Yeah. Well, these buildings are going to have to be built differently. It's going to take a level of coordination effort. It's going to have to take a level of education. And that's really why we have all of these panels and these different things like that, because we see that in the industry. And we deal with our clients on a one-on-one basis, but we're trying to get the message out there that everybody's going to have to change a little bit.
Well, just a comment, because I hang around a lot of architects, but I'm not one. They think about sort of the experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
For sure.
And often in very qualitative, very sort of lofty and cerebral ways. And I think that's sort of the gateway that we have to go through, right? Is to help them to recognize that all the smart building stuff and all this OT is actually a way to complement, enhance the experience.
Right.
And that's exactly it. I had a call this morning with an architecture firm, and we were talking about a mutual client, and we're doing all the MEP work on it, but they want to get in and have a digital twin conversation and see what the benefits are. So I said, okay, do you know what a digital twin is? And then I followed it up with, what did the client say? Well, I want to be able to walk in and use my mobile to do a bunch of stuff. So, okay, now I'm hearing tenant experience or occupant experience. Then I want my operators to be able to have visibility into the systems no matter where they are. Okay, that's operator experience. So that's the key to finding that common language. And we've been pretty successful in having those conversations. One of my partners, Donnie Walker, some of you may know him, we go around to different architecture firms and we give a presentation on that. Like, what are the key things to listen to, how to respond to them, and then what do you have to do afterwards when you hear the word experience? That's the trigger word for those folks, and it really does reach out to them.
But start where they are.
Yeah.
Don't start with the tech, start with them and work back.
Never talk about tech. Yeah, I mean, that was my big thing. Like I said, when I would talk to the CIOs, I never talked tech. I never talked about what was involved. I said, what are your targets? What are your aspirations?
Yep.
What's your budget?
How do you want people to feel?
Right? That's the CEO and the clinicians, right? What is the experience you want? You want to be able to walk up, use your finger, unlock the PC, get in and take care of the patient, take your notes and walk away? Perfect. That's all I need from you. And then I'll go back and figure out all the tech stuff,
Yep.
right?
Great discussion. Any other questions as right now? Okay. If not, I have another one, because the word came up and then we kind of kept going, but commissioning.
Yep.
Let's go back to commissioning. I do a lot of commissioning. I do a lot of recommissioning. How do we get better at making sure commissioning actually happens, and it happens, not in a rush at the end trying to get the occupancy permit, but like in a way that it, actually ensures that the systems meet their design goals and everything actually works?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that commissioning is hired directly by the owner, that the owner holds the contract, so that the commissioning agent is working for the owner on his behalf and not adherent to the construction schedule, right? Because I've been in both situations. I ran a small commissioning firm for a while, and I used to have to massage my project or my process based on the job and how it was procured. So if I have a construction management company running the job, then I would make sure that I'm an extension of their team if they don't have anyone on the mechanical side. As a commissioning agent, your job isn't to go and count duck hangers and slow the process down. Your job is to make sure that the job is installed as per contract documents, but in an efficient way, to make sure the owner gets exactly what he thought he paid for. And the challenge in that sometimes is the level of detail that's put in the construction documents. If your construction documents are weak, then you don't have much of a hammer as a commissioning agent. Now, one of the things that's it's been a hot button for a while, and Mike can attest to this, cyber commissioning, right? How many of you have heard of cyber security commissioning, cyber commissioning? So that's a hot button. And now ASHRAE is getting involved with cyber commissioning. The RECC is getting involved in cyber commissioning. I know you are, Mike, getting involved in cyber commissioning and putting together a process that is attached to to the traditional commissioning process that's provided by the BCA, the AABC, and those are the guidelines that most commissioning agents follow, right? So now there's a supplement that's going to be introduced to the marketplace for cyber commissioning.
I think the biggest challenge in commissioning is currently right now they look at individual systems to determine the direction of operation. What we're looking at now is a smart building where all the systems
Holistic.
are integrated
Yep.
together, where we got card access, CCTV, lighting controls, HVAC, power monitoring. So when a guy walks in, he swipes the thing, the lights come on, HVAC equipment comes on, the power meter figures up, and then a utility bill is created. There is no script. You don't see commissioning agents producing that script and testing that procedure.
Yep.
Ever. They do the individual systems, but then do a full integrated.
Yeah, it doesn't exist yet,
Yeah.
but it's coming.
Yeah, totally agree.
We have a commissioning group too, and we're marrying our studios together to figure out that line of demarcation. They test the system, we test the overall, right? Like, because it needs to be. You have to have that.
Right.
You have to have that holistic viewpoint,
I've never
right?
seen a commission agent check the alarms that they go to the
Yeah.
departments, the individuals, et cetera, and producing the necessary reports that's required when you have a fully integrated system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Starts
because
from the commissioning scope, right?
Yep.
Issued by the owner.
and it needs
Yeah.
to be early on in the process because I don't want to check 1,000 widgets after they're installed.
Exactly.
I want to check the first 10, the
10%,
next 100,
yeah.
right? I want to continue on that process because at the end of the day, you're making a smart building, and a smart building is all about data. And so data comes from various sources. If you talk about, to your point, siloed systems, we just worked and did a smart building design that incorporates surveillance. And so we need to make sure that the analytic that's running on it, because we said, oh, you guys want to do occupancy sensors, but you don't want to put occupancy sensors everywhere. But you have cameras on every ingress and egress point at all of your facilities all over the world. So why not collect some anonymous data? Now I have census data. Census data is huge. It's probably one of the most important pieces of data that you can have as an operations person in your building. And you can make so many different decisions with that. If you're in the South, you can have them, people work 3 days a week, put them in one side of the building on the north side of the building away from the sun, right? Now I don't have to heat and cool that side that much, right? That's energy savings.
Yep.
And you start to go, and because the hardest part, again, to your point, is you're translating a 2D engineered drawing into the field, right? It's great that we can have 3D drawings, but the average installer out there doesn't have access to those. They're working on a sheet of paper.
Right.
And they've got to change that into a 3D image in their mind to change and manipulate that and install it in the 3D world. And sometimes there are some problems where that stuff's up against the wall because the wall wasn't there in the drawing,
right.
right?
That's right.
And so that's where the commissioning process kind of comes over and oversees all of that and buttons that up. But if it starts at the end of the project, it becomes an almost impossible job. It's not like the never-ending story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The issue with access is a lot of times the requirements for access are buried in the specification for the specific pieces of equipment. And that's why it's important for the commissioning agent to know where it is, to make sure he's doing his walkthroughs and make sure that all that equipment is accessible.
Heard somebody give a great example the other day about you starting to use like ChatGPT to ask, to query the specification of where's the what are the power requirements for the VAV boxes, and whose responsibility, and they would upload the document to ChatGPT and use that because who's going to read a 300-page spec? But they were finding it valuable to use these kind of AI tools to pull out that kind of information from a
When you
spec.
write a 300-page spec, you're like the greatest unread author in the world. Right. Right?
No kidding.
I thought it was all copy and paste.
What
get some of that stuff on the
here,
drawings.
Dave? We didn't hear from Dave on commissioning, so
Yeah,
I'm
I was
curious on your perspective.
Yeah, I was
'cause-
just going to kind of take it from maybe a different perspective, right? So I totally agree on the commissioning-based, siloed type systems. I see that all the time. I think, for me, it's really kind of the difference of kind of that owner-negotiated type work versus kind of the bid and spec, right?
Absolutely.
Because from an owner-negotiated, I look at that as more of like a partnership, right, with the owner. So as the master systems integration, expert, right, for our partner, our owner, we want to make sure that there is all that interoperability, right? We want to make sure that these systems are connected and that those use cases that we all defined at the beginning of the project are actually happening, right? And if they aren't, was it the wrong technology that was selected or spec'd by perhaps a different, by others type person? So that's the kind of thing. I don't think you should really wait till the end, right, of the project to kind of determine that. I think it's as things are installed and brought online, I think, good MSI is kind of testing all those systems to make sure that functionality is available so we can identify it up front before it becomes a problem. And if it's too late, well now, what are we really delivering at the end of the day? It's not exactly at all what the owner wanted to see, so.
Yeah. A point that I always make I'm talking about commissioning is like, commissioning isn't the thing that happens at the end of the project. Like commissioning, in my mind, it starts during design.
Yeah.
And you want, like if you're hiring a third-party commissioning agent, get them engaged at the design phase to make sure that they can review that specification and make sure it's something they can actually commission, because they may look at it and be like, well, like you're missing all these sensors that I need. You've got like this sequence. I don't know what this sequence is supposed to do. Like, from that kind of, and having that lens on the specification, I think ultimately makes it a better specification, but then also makes it something that at the end of the day you can actually successfully commission.
Yeah, the commission agent should be involved in design reviews. They should be involved in shop drawing reviews, all the way through functional testing. Yeah,
I always shake my head every time I get a request, because we get people RFPs coming to us to be commissioning providers, and it's like, the project is already 2/3 of the way through construction, and then now we're hiring them. Like, sorry,
and
like
you're trying to have commissioning meetings, and the contractors don't have time because it's not in their budget. I get it.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Questions? Actually, come on.
I'm going to use the mic because my voice is kind of going out. But also I would suggest whoever's asking questions, we can't hear them in the back, so either repeat them or let's use the mic to
Thank you.
participate. So speaking from a smart building perspective, I'm an architect, and I work with a lot of large owners that are trying to get smart buildings. We're actually helping them write what they should ask. So one mistake I think out there is owners are not asking the right questions. Their contracts are based on the past. They even call it documents. It's not information. If we want smart buildings, we need information. So I think we need to change that dialogue, both from the owner's perspective and as an industry, to actually encourage owners to do that. And there's a lot of great architects and engineers that are doing amazing things with BIM and digital twins, but almost every single delivery I've seen has come in a cardboard box. Here's a box of hard drives, here's a box of documents, and then the owner has to spend 6 months to 18 months reverse engineering our work with other teams to understand what assets they have in the field. So the reason I'm here at AHR, from a digital twin perspective, I'm involved with the National Institute of Building Sciences, looking for connections to the control systems that are out there. And the more and more I'm hearing is that the systems are proprietary and closed, which is our biggest challenge. We need open systems, right? Truly open systems. And the way to get truly open system is to demand as an industry and to educate owners to say, stop writing these contracts the way you're writing them, because you're going to continue to get these cardboard boxes, which diminishes our value as an industry. It's a huge lost opportunity that we have no more time to change. I'm wondering, from your experience, has there been any movement to make that shift that needs to happen, because there absolutely is no more time. We heard about the fire hose from the Cochrane Group. Actually, Scott, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but you mentioned it the first day, and I think that's a perfect example. This fire hose that's coming our way, we're not catching it fast enough, and we're going to drown in that inability to make that shift. So we need to stop talking about files and documents. I know all of it's important, but all the information is kind of baked into these cardboard boxes, which has very little value in the world that we live in today.
Scott, you had your hand up?
Well, kind of to dovetail on that, so open systems, but systems integration, right?
Right.
Oh,
Oh,
get the mic.
so we talked about open systems for a minute, and for a lot of us, we know that it comes with systems integration, right? That's That's what it allows us to do at a much lower cost than if we don't have open systems. We can still integrate systems that are not open, though, just so you all know. But my question to the panel is could you speak to the design changes and specifications that allow systems integration to help make this a reality for people in terms of, how should they specify it? Like the other gentleman here mentioned, we're tying in lighting, security, other things. How can you specify that, right? Because now you're going against different disciplines. It's not just the MEPs now, right? You got a whole bunch of groups that you're affecting. So how are people adjusting their specifications to support that?
Let me start with that one, because I know you'll be able to chime in. What we've been promoting is the use of Division 25. How many ME firms in here are using Division 25? How many MEP firms are not using Division 25? It's called integrated automation, right? And that's what we're trying to promote, is the use of integrated automation, so that all of these disciplines that are involved in the integration process, lighting, energy, it can be elevators, right? They all point back to Division 25. They all point back to that systems integration drawing, so that each one of these disciplines know their roles and responsibilities in the integration process. Because the MSI sits up here, right? And the MSI is sort of like a commissioning agent for Division 23 and these other disciplines that are involved in the integration process. So that's where we start at, promoting the use of Division 25.
And who creates that? Is it the MEP?
The MEP.
MEP? Okay.
The MEP.
So,
Yeah, the MEP.
so even though it crosses over into IT and
Absolutely.
lighting and electrical, it's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because in order to create that specification, you have to identify all the different components, all those silos that are involved. And that's the one, it's literally the Beatles of the design world, because it's the come together. That's what brings everything together. And we make cross-references in our Div 25 specification to everybody else's specs. Part of our contract is, if we're going to write a Div 25 on this project, you need to give us availability, visibility, and have the opportunity for feedback into those other specifications. Why? Because this is the North Star. If the North Star is a smart building, that is the vehicle through which it is delivered. And the vehicle requires gas, it requires a pilot, requires enough seats, it requires all of those things to be able to tie that together. If we're doing a very simple integration with controls and lighting, I need to look at the Div 23 and Div 26 spec. I need to make sure that the specification is including technology that can be integrated. Right? That's number one. What we're seeing now, though, is a lot of projects, they're not ready for that yet. And so how do you promote that? Now we're back to all of these silos with nobody overseeing it. So it goes back to education, right? It goes back to the owner. It goes back to the OPR, right? Owner's project requirements. That's another vehicle for delivery, so that you can capture that information for the design team to be able to follow. So that way you're prepared for integration. So I'm buying smart today so I can leverage the smart tomorrow. Just so if I want to bring in, a master systems integrator, do some type of integration later, at least I've got the core components.
Right.
Because when this stuff gets bought, even if it's whether it's greenfield or brownfield, it really doesn't matter. The stuff has to be bought correctly.
Correct.
So that it can facilitate that vision long term.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I'd really call that, identifying the integration path, right? And that's, again, what you're doing up front when you're selecting that type of equipment. You don't want to select something that might be proprietary, or it's, maybe it has an API, so it appears to be open, but, do your homework. Make sure that this isn't something that it's a annual fee on that API, and it's, your death by 1,000 cuts, right, of all these extra fees for this equipment. So, having something that can be natively integrated inside the building instead of having to go out to all these different private clouds, try to do that first. If you can't, that's okay. Then, there are those other options out there, right, where this technology can work for you.
Yeah, and ask questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If the point was brought up, the owners aren't asking the right questions. Well, if everybody learns what questions should be asked, then they can identify when they're not being asked, and they can propose them. Right? It's that simple.
Yeah. A lot of architectural firms who don't have full service MEP, they rely on their MEP firms or their consultants they're hiring as their trusted advisors. And they take for granted that they understand smart building technology. So I think it all goes back to educating the MEP firms who are operating out there alone and making them understand what is smart building technology? How do you future-proof your clients' buildings?
Speaking of educating MEP firms, this is a good segue into cybersecurity. How do you do, like, you know, I'm an HVAC. I know HVAC systems. I don't know anything about IT systems. I mean, I do now, but I didn't when I started this. And like, I don't know, I actually kind of want to hear from maybe Mike first on this, just as, you know, as a sort of the mechanical MEP consultant. I know you guys have done a lot of work on cybersecurity. Just take us maybe quickly through the evolution that your firm has gone through in terms of how you approach cybersecurity and your control specs.
That was a fun conversation with my partners. You want to what? So basically, cybersecurity in a nutshell is it involves two things. It involves the virtual world, it involves the physical world, right? Because if you don't physically secure your assets, then they have access to your virtual assets. And it's not overly complicated. It can be in certain instances, but we have this thing in the industry we call basic cyber hygiene. If it comes with the ability to manipulate it through an interface from a human to a machine, it's probably got a username and a password. Don't go with the defaults. So when I wrote the first cyber specification for our Div 25, we almost got kicked off the project because I had verbiage in there about like the owner's required to do this, and I had it all specified. You know, I took the typical IT route, and where I didn't realize was in the food chain of everything, I am way down here, and the owner is way over here, so I can't specify something for the owner to do. So I've refined it, and I said, okay, what is so it's all about risk and risk appetite. That's cybersecurity in a nutshell. Right? So when I was a kid in Detroit growing up, I couldn't afford insurance. I lived in the worst zip code over by City Airport, and it was $1,200 for a 76 Chevy Nova with holes in the floor every 6 months. So I'd bust my butt, save up my money. Around my birthday, I'd go get my insurance, go get my license renewed, and then I'd just drop it because I couldn't afford it. But that was a risk I was willing to take. Right? It's all about the assumption of risk. And that's a conversation pretty much is universal that everybody can understand. So if you go at it with a risk standpoint, an MEP that doesn't do cybersecurity now says, well, I'm not going to do it because it's a liability for me to include that. But what we're introducing now is that basic cyber hygiene process where I say, all right, system integrators, you don't need to incur any extra cost or up your bill because you have to bring in a cybersecurity expert to install controls. But what I'm going to ask you to do is don't use admin as a username. Change your passwords from the defaults. Very, very simple things like that, right? Turn on logging on the machine. I have like maybe 10 or 12 different things that I've incorporated, not just in our Div 25, but in our Div 23, Div 28, all the other divisions that we do. And it's very simple language, and I have gotten no negative feedback from that, from any project that I've worked on in the last 4 years since I've introduced it. That is the way forward for a lot of MEPs to dip their toes. When I was at AHR in 22, it was in Atlanta. And I ran into a bunch of people, and I'm like, oh, you're an MEP too, cool. What do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm actually doing cybersecurity. They're like, yeah, no, controls are by others. Like that was like the end of the car. I couldn't even get coffee. Like it was just like that. Like, man, I didn't realize I was going to do that. So it's, again, it's that paradigm shift in the industry. It's understanding where liability is. It's talking about addressing risk. That basic cyber hygiene, that simple stuff, already starts the building on its way to being cyber secure. Because the first thing I do, if I'm pen testing, is I look for vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And if I look for pieces of equipment, it's got its name on it. Sometimes it's got its IP address written on it. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And sometimes it'll even have usernames and passwords hidden amongst the documentation hanging in the door. Right. Now I don't have to do anything other than get access to the system, right? But if I don't, it takes me 2 seconds to Google the manufacturer model, pull up the diagram for it, pull up how it's connected, what it does, and I'll find the default username and password, which is the first thing I try. One of my favorite tests back in the day when I was in IT, I walked up to a machine, and I woke it, and it had a Control-Alt-Delete, boom, open the login screen, it says administrator on it. I walked away from it. Why? Well, it's asking for an administrative login. I don't know the password for it. There was no password. You just hit enter. Somebody showed me that, and I just about died. I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So I started using that as a test for people. And I actually went to our IT group with 250 people, and I had them pass by the machine and do that individually. And I did it with, I think, about 50 people as a control. And half of them just hit enter. The other half walked away from it. And it depended on the knowledge and the skill set of where they were. And it's the same thing here in this industry, is getting people, it's not overwhelming, it's very simple, small steps. But those small steps are the biggest steps to take. Because if you can start there, the controls equipment going in, you've lowered the risk for anything happening dramatically. Just from doing that. Now, don't worry about buying a product for cybersecurity, and because it's not a product, it's a program. And so, but if you specify just to say, hey, change the default passwords, don't use admin because it denotes a privilege level, assign the appropriate privilege levels to the equipment. I know Tritium, that's a huge thing. Being able to say, okay, you're going to have a level 0, which means you get read-only access. You're going to be a level 5 because you're going to be a super user. Don't make everybody a super user, right? Those are the simple things that we incorporate into the language and the specs to get people going.
Okay, I like it.
Agree.
Start simple.
Yeah, I would just add to that I mean, how many sites I probably come across that, you, especially like a Tritium site, it's always kind of that standard day one username and password. They've never been rotated. I think as an owner from that perspective, this is a conversation I think you need to have with your MSIs, even with the MEP firms, right? And just say, what is the cybersecurity strategy here? Is it something that every 90 days we have to rotate accounts? We should be using two-factor single sign-on. Almost every application should have something like that today. And if it's not, I think we're using the wrong technology at this point. I would even say, even for local accounts, yes, we've all come across those in the panel. They're written in, Sharpie, great. But if you rotate your passwords on those and you do a good job of that, you really just set up dedicated service accounts. That goes a long way. And I think the more IP devices that are getting added into that network, it could be the power meter. It could be a BACnet MSTP, to IP router. All of those things have username and passwords, and I almost guarantee everyone I've come across is like admin blank, or admin.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to get into these systems, and I think, that's kind of beyond the day one, right? I mean, we're kind of now the life cycle of that building. You have to have a partner or provider that's providing service and working with you to kind of make sure you're having that cyber hygiene checkup, right? I mean, it should be an annual report that they're providing for you. So we've kind of implemented that a lot with our clients today, definitely in the federal space. It's a requirement. So I think it's been very successful for them. And we're going to continue to push that for sure.
Greg, when you're working with consultants, what kind of conversations are you having with both cybersecurity?
Remote access. One of the things we know is that 99% of buildings out there are going to have some type of remote access, right? Whether it's for just the owner or owner and service providers. And one thing that MEP firms need to know is what products are out there made for the, let's say, the facilities world or the BAS world that are zero trust remote access hardware and software solutions to be able to at the very least, put that in your specification as the quote-unquote firewall or the remote access strategy. But like Mike said, cybersecurity isn't just a product, it's a process or a program, but at the very least, have some of those base level things in place, like a remote access strategy that implements zero trust.
I find in most cases now, if I'm talking about remote access, that automatically initiates a conversation with the IT department.
Right.
And then they want to be involved in deciding how that remote access is going to look like. Even if it's, a separate, like anything that comes into their buildings, they want to have their fingers in. So I'm having to have a lot of those conversations. And is that something you guys are seeing as well? Like with the IT increasingly sort of, I don't want to say sticking their nose into our area is kind of a bad connotation, but there's way more conversations now happening between IT and MEPs and others, right?
We actually have a Division 2520 specification sheet on how to engage the owner's IT.
Yep.
I love it.
Specifically just to help people out, to say, okay, this is how you have the conversation, this is who you contact. You're going to conduct workshops. You're going to, do discovery and find out, how do I get IP addresses? What do I have to do? Yeah, one client I did a cyber commissioning job for. It was already, it was one of those that came after the building was built. And so I said, okay, this is going to be for your awareness then, because there's no obligation on the end of any of the system integrators to do any of the fixing because it wasn't there in the contract to put it in. And that was one of the bigger things that I found was in order to get an IP address to get on the network, they had to provide a spreadsheet and then they were given a password from IT and they were given a username. And that was now going to be the default, but it was given by the IT group. And I thought that was a really slick move. In order to get on the network, you have to change these things. A lot of the manufacturers are starting to build that into the products. So it's kind of helping a little bit, right? So if you go to log in for the very first time, it's going to say you have to enter in a password. That's one of the easier ways to do it. So it's kind of like it's all being attacked from various angles, right? So you've got manufacturers on the MEP side. It helps to know which products are incorporating that, right? So there's going to have to be a little bit of education, a little bit of research.
Any question?
Yeah, something I want to bring up from my experience, I'm sure you've dealt with this in certain ways as well, is there seems to be times where if you're getting involved in commissioning late into the process, you feel like you're looking for ways to make up value. You've missed it at the early design stage. Leveraging the service contract time that systems integrators often are sold to an owner. I see too many times where the commissioning groups are missing out on the opportunity to get in with the owner on what is going to be in the service contract and what can we continue to do during that time to improve the process. And so if you can at least make sure that the correct equipment and software is there in the first place, talk together like, well, what do you want long-term to the project? What is the service contract that you're about to agree to sign on for? What's included in that? Are we going to not just validate that, hey, the hardware's still there and it's on, but like, are we cleaning up and normalizing data over there? Are we providing access logs from our supervisors to the IT groups so that they can also double check these and validate that, hey, well, facilities, we've had 4 changes of staff members, now they're all just using the original guys' login places. And so there's a lot there that can be set up in that window time. So the project's completed, and if you get on, if you're in there at like the early design phase, or like 95% design phase or whatnot, that can help you recover a lot of value from the owner.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because IT is very process oriented, right? And as these devices get more advanced and they evolve, they're becoming more like computers, which is what IT is used to dealing with, right? So identity and access management is a main function that IT should have. Right? I'm going to maintain this for you. You tell me who you want to have access and to what level, right? But IT would maintain that on behalf of facilities. So it takes the onus off of facilities. All too often we see the dump and it's the other way around. It's like, well, this is your deal. You got to take care of it and you've got to manage it and you've got to take care of all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
I can't find the J's.
I even saw like with some of our clients, like, we'll have like a password keeper or something like that they own, right? They maintain, but they're also monitoring it to make sure that has that entry been updated within so many days, right? So that's kind of their like spot check to make sure that these things are actually happening after day one. So,
and I think too, this kind of goes back to the point where you're talking about adoption of the smart technology in the space. When I talk to IT groups, I'm like, listen, your budget's about to get bigger. It's going to have to, right? Because your whole thing is a cost plus, and you're used to dealing with OpEx. Well, guess what? All these things have a life cycle to them now. They all have licensing. On the facility side, guess what? You're going to be responsible for more than just the operations of the building. You're going to be responsible for the operations of the equipment, and you're going to have to develop a program. So it gets that more engaged. If they own it, and they have an engagement, they have a reason to invest themselves in it too. So it kind of helps with that ownership aspect.
Yeah, that's why we keep trying to push that OT governance team within owners group. A member from IT and a member from facilities to oversee all the smart technology.
Question? Yeah.
So we've had a lot of questions here about talking about how can we prevent this from going wrong in the process, or how can I get engaged earlier? How can an owner or an architect validate that the person they're hiring, that they're actually getting the expertise they need to actually get the success they want and need? So if I was an owner or an architect, I would ask you, how would I ask for your services in a way that I could validate?
Yeah, I'd say for me, like, find an MSI that has a track record. I mean, there's a million people, million different companies in the world that say, oh yeah, we can integrate all that for you, that's no problem. But ask them for their case studies, right? They're all gonna have that, right? The qualified ones, they've done this before, they've had many successful projects with clients. I think that would be like my best suggestion to you is just find someone that's actually done all this stuff before. You know, it's more than just talk and marketing.
From an MEP standpoint, if you're talking an owner that's talking to an architect, then you want to make sure that you interview multiple MEP firms who are familiar with smart building technology and take those notes and continue those interviews.
Yeah, it really becomes awareness and education, right? To the other gentleman's point, the owners aren't asking the right question. Are the architects asking the right question? Is anybody asking the right question, right? So it's through these types of engagements, and you have to do a little bit of work yourself, doing some research and what the right approach is. But there are a lot of, I've been to a couple of different recent conferences where they have those use cases. They have their stories being told. One of them was Kaiser Permanente, and it was a 10-year story. 10 years of learning on their own. So they're kind of one of the pioneers, right, as an owner operator. One of the stories they were telling me was we got so smart we became dumb and we tripped on ourselves. So they brought all of their health system assets together, and somebody made a change in Niagara, and they didn't realize it affected all of the hospitals. And so instead of just shutting down the BMS at the one hospital, they kind of knocked them all offline because they didn't realize the power that they had at their fingertips because the person making the change had the wrong privilege levels. He goes, so we learned that, and then we learned this. And so those case studies are probably the biggest benefit for education and just making yourselves aware of what questions to ask. That's how you get that knowledge, right? You get to learn from other people's mistakes. Right. I love doing that. I don't want to be that guy.
There's ways, and I think there's some like ways to also rethink how you put the team together too. I mean, there's been a number of projects that we've been involved in. We're not the mechanical engineer, but we're writing the control spec. So yeah, there's a separate mechanical. They're doing all of the piping layouts and the equipment selection, all of that. And then we're taking that information, we're writing the control spec. They're not writing their own control spec, but that's going to a specialty firm. And I think that's another way is not, you don't necessarily have to rely on the mechanical engineer to write your control spec. You can hire somebody else to do that for you, whether it's an MSI or it's a specialty a consulting firm.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We've got 2 minutes left. Yeah.
Do you not think that the message you're presenting here is going to scare a lot of owners away because they're just going to see their costs escalating. They're going to see, because all these professional services that are being pulled in and involved are going to stop adoption of smart buildings and the real scaling of them. And I think until we get that right, you're not going to see the adoption increase the way that the industry, us as professionals, want to see it increase.
I think failing to achieve it is probably the biggest deterrent for adoption. Back in my day when Wi-Fi first came out, I was rolling it out in hospitals, and they were misusing it. They were running queries to SQL databases over 11 meg or 5 meg connections, which was just crushing it. It wasn't the right application for it. And so therefore, Wi-Fi was terrible. They didn't want it anywhere. Now you can't get away from it, right? Because they've rewritten their applications correctly to run over that medium. If we can get the process figured out, then you're right, adoption will go up. I don't think it's going to act as a deterrent right now because there's been a lot of success stories out there. In fact, I'm leaving tomorrow to fly to Charlotte to go meet at 110 East, which is now being touted as one of the smartest buildings in North America. So the case studies surrounding that are really impressive. The way they're able to put it together. And so I think it's just getting the general folks to come together to realize that, hey, we need to start thinking differently. And I need to rethink my role, and I need to ask questions. And that's just going to foster adoption faster.
I get that so you're talking about flagship buildings. It's got to be smart buildings for all, and not all buildings would be able to go to those extremes of cost. And again, I reiterate, we're engineers based in the UK, and we successfully roll out smart building platforms And the only way it scales is when you can get it done quickly, effectively, and efficiently. Is the only way it will scale. And I think you're doing the right things, but I see all of this. If I was an owner, an architect, it would scare me. I really do believe that. It's got to be made simple.
Yeah, and there's some simple resources out there. Like, for instance, we have a website called smartbuildingdesign.com where you can find a lot of simple solutions like specification, systems integration drawings, and other things that will help you with the basics for smart building design. It's called smartbuildingdesign.com. All
right. And with that, we are at time. Yeah, join me. Give these guys a hand. It's a good panel. I'm sure people will be hanging around for a few minutes. If you have any more burning